You're listening to Against All Odds, my face-to-face discussions with everyday people who inspire.
I remember seeing my mum running down the hallway. She opened the sliding door, and as she just came out of the sliding door, exited, my father stabbed her in the back.
My name is Odell Odds Harris. In this episode of Against All Odds, I speak to Donna-Leigh Perfect. We sit in the Gold Coast studio of Drew Kruck and delve deep into Donna's horrific past and find out how she triumphed over those demons to become one of Australia's top anti-bullying campaigners. Sit down for this one, and I reckon you need the tissues handy.
I was born in New Zealand, way back in the 60s, 1966, in Auckland, and the youngest of 5 siblings. I'm actually a twin. We lived in a little western suburb called Avondale, and just a pretty normal life, Odds. Just going about normal life as you do. And we did a lot of camping as kids, and it was a pretty happy kind of childhood up until the age of 7, when things drastically changed for me. So one morning, I woke to my mother's piercing screams while I was in bed, very early in the morning actually. My father was an early riser, being an ex-farmer, and woke to my mother's piercing screams and jumped out of bed to see what was happening. And I remember seeing my mum running down the hallway while my father was screaming and yelling and swearing at her. She was being chased by my dad, and he was holding a knife. So that was a pretty scary moment for me.
Yeah, it would have been. What was he saying?
I can't remember, to be honest. Just lots of abusive kind of words and very angry and chasing her down the hallway. And so we had a spiral staircase in our house, 2-story house, and we were on the top level. And I recall Mum, running down this spiral staircase as Dad chased behind. And I just recall, running, chasing after Dad. And I remember my brother and my sister coming out of their rooms too, and a lot of kind of chaos. And as my mum was trying to escape.
Were you able to intervene?
No. So my brothers, my elder brothers, were downstairs. They had their room downstairs, and so they were coming out of their room, and they sort of came to a position where they were just behind Mum as she was coming out of the sliding door of the downstairs entrance way, and she opened the sliding door, and as she just came out of the sliding door, exited, my father stabbed her in the back.
And you saw it?
Yes, I saw the whole thing. So she stumbled to the ground and got up and stumbled a few more times as she was trying to get away along the side of the house, coming toward the front of the pathway, toward the front of the house. And she collapsed to the ground and died right there.
What did your father do?
Well, that's a funny thing, you see, because all I recall, it was just such I guess, you're in shock in that moment. And all I remember is my father, and it must have been some minutes later, and I don't know how long, I remember my father standing up on the balcony directly in front of the house, yelling absurdities from the balcony, almost like a madman, like he'd lost his mind, just laughing a little, like a crazy laugh, and yelling, and we were sort of hysterical, completely hysterical in the front of the driveway, just, screaming. And before long, we had our neighbour next door coming over because he was an ambulance officer. And, then the police, ambulance, everybody was there and in a matter of minutes. And it was just chaos, just, absolute trauma.
Did you get to her before she died?
To be honest, I don't recall. I don't recall that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I was in so much shock, I don't even remember whether I had a chance to say goodbye to her. I think it was just, everything was happening so quickly and it was so unbelievable. So unbelievable.
So who called the police? What happened? What did your father address you guys?
Yeah, so it's all, as I say, a little bit of a foggy sort of memory I have, but I would imagine that the next door neighbour would have called the police and the ambulance and everything. He's a very responsible citizen, and there were a number of neighbours that were gathering around, and I recall a police car picking up my brothers and sister and I, and we were taken down to my cousin's house just down the road away, and I don't remember what happened with my father. I only remember him standing on that balcony and yelling out, and a lot of kind of activity, and us being whisked away very quickly in this police car to my cousins. But I remember arriving to my cousins, and we were just, just absolutely, just so traumatized. Like I just remember being quite hysterical and arriving there, and all I remember is hearing on the radio what had happened at their house, which was kind of,
Surreal.
Really surreal.
Did you have a close relationship with your father? Or had there been any displays of domestic violence before, or any mental illness or anything like that?
I think I do recall. I do recall my father having a lot of arguments with my uncle, my mum's brother, she was very close to, and it was normally when they were drunk, they would have quite aggressive arguments. I do remember that. And I also remember one night when I was driving with my mother to my uncle's house. And this is also a bit weird and surreal, but I recall being in the car with her and her saying that she didn't think she was going to live for long. And I didn't understand that at that stage. I would have only been about 6 or 7, and I really didn't really comprehend what that meant.
No, how can you? So you mentioned that you were a twin, but you also said just then that you had some brothers, older brothers and things.
Yes.
How old were they?
My brothers were 5 and 6 years older than me, so they were 13, 14. My sister was 15. So I just remember being in my cousin's house for a while, and I think we stayed there for a few weeks and till we were in the custody of the social welfare.
Did you have a funeral and things for your mum?
Yeah, funny thing, so I don't even remember that. I have no memory of whether I went to the funeral or not. And that's so strange, isn't it? But I have no memory.
Do you talk to your brother and sisters about this?
It's a really delicate situation, and not really. My sister and I have had some conversations around it, but she prefers to leave it as something in the past. And my older brother, that is living in Auckland still, I haven't spoken to for quite a number of years, and my twin brother and I unfortunately don't get on so well either. So it is really unfortunate. My older brother that lived in Memphis passed away 18 months ago of cancer. So we did discuss a lot of this before he passed, which was really quite cleansing for me and for him. Yeah. He talked a lot about how much he loved Mum, and how there were probably a lot of signs throughout that time prior to her death that were really, he had some bad memories of Dad being quite aggressive and quite aggressive to him and my other brother. And so he sort of saw it as being a little bit inevitable. My mum, prior to all this happening, my mum had a mental breakdown, and she spent some time in Wellington having shock treatment. Back in those days, that was the treatment they gave for mental illness. And And she was I think she was in a very weak state of mental health. And my father was very controlling and probably quite narcissistic.
What happened to Bob?
Bob died on his second major bypass operation when I was 17.
I mean, what happened to Bob after that day?
Oh, that day. That day he went to prison. So he was taken and he went to prison, and there were quite extensive, court case that went on for many, many months, and lots of family involved in affidavits and giving evidence in relation to how unstable he was as a person, and also family members trying to get custody of us from the welfare system, which were unsuccessful. So we ended up in foster homes, and he ended up in jail.
So did you ever talk to him after that?
Yes. So we went to foster homes for 6 years and moved from...
When you say we, is it just two of you and your twin, or do you mean the whole family?
My twin brother and I were together always, and my older brothers were separated from us. My sister, she was in a boarding school when this all happened, and pretty quickly after went into flatting with some friends from school. So she never went into foster care as such. And so we were in foster care, my brother and I. The first home we went to was in Mount Eden in Auckland. And the man that looked after us was alcoholic, never, I believe, screened. So it was a very, very unstable man. And I recall one night being locked in our room when we went to bed, and I recall my sister coming to visit us and hearing the conversation in the kitchen where he was saying to my sister that the twins don't love you and they don't need to see you. And I remember hearing her sob as she left the house.
And how old was she?
She would have been about probably 16, 17.
How does that happen that you go into the welfare system over there? You know, you had relations wanting to bring you up.
Bob fought that till he was black and blue.
He wanted you to go into foster care?
Yes, he didn't want any of Alison's family. My mum's name was Alison, and he didn't want any of her family having any custody whatsoever. So he fought for the children to be in social welfare custody.
So that first guy, do you remember his name or anything?
No, he was with his wife. I remember his name was Mr. Smith. I think it might have been John. And
he told your sister that you didn't love him anymore.
Yeah. So that was one experience that we had there. And I remember another experience where I was asked to run a bath for one of the other foster children in the house. And I was only 7, and I had no idea actually how to run a bath. So I turned on the hot water, and the little girl got into the bath scalding herself. And he just threw off the handle, and he threw me on his bed, and he pulled down my pants and took off his belt and just started pounding into me with his belt, whipping me with his belt.
You still got to go to school and all that sorts of things?
Yes. So that was extremely challenging because...
The same school that you were at?
No.
Different school?
Yeah. No, so we were pillared from one foster home to another foster home, from school to school. So it was extremely unstable, my schooling life, and never fitted into any sort of friendship circle or anything. I was probably traumatised and quite different to the other kids, and so as soon as I made a friend, I would be moving again to another school. In fact, I went to 13 schools.
Why is there no stability in that environment?
I think it's a real shortcoming of the social welfare system back in that day, and they recognised that, and in fact there was a huge compensation claim that's only just recently been finalised in New Zealand. Thousands and thousands of children in the social welfare system that were abused and mistreated that have now come out of the woodwork, and it's been very shocking. I recall another foster home I was at. I was with my brothers, my older brothers and my twin, and
so you got to the same one?
At one time, yes, we were together, and my brothers were going through a lot of trauma themselves, and obviously rebelling because of all of the experiences they'd had through this, and without counselling, without any support, they were acting out in bad behaviour, and so they were doing things that teenagers do, I guess, especially having gone through what we went through. And the foster family the father was extremely aggressive and abusive, and I recall him beating my brothers quite regularly while I saw that, and that was awful to see. They then went on to a borstal for a little while, a boys' school for dysfunctional kids that are, misbehaving. It wasn't long. I think it might have only been a few weeks, but it was just to try and get them back on track with their behaviour.
Did it work for them? Not really.
No, not at all, because the last foster home we went to, we were together again, which was really fantastic because, it was really traumatising to be separated from first of all, to lose my mum in such a traumatic way, and then for my father to be separated and gone to prison, and then all of us to be separated and put into foster homes where we're living with strangers in a strange house you've never been to, you've never seen before, and with a suitcase and then going to a school and not recognising anybody, not having any friends, no network, nothing. It's incredibly unstable environment. And this last home was in Manurewa, which is South Auckland. This home was on an acreage property, and it was like a huge homestead. I remember probably 7 or 8 rooms, huge house. And the foster parents were the Bernards and Hank and Colleen, and Hank was Dutch. Quite a hard man. And we arrived there, and they've got a son and a daughter, and, I guess in their early teen years, and really, really spoilt. There were already other foster children in this home when we arrived. And I remember Colleen saying to me that I'm just a piece of shit, and that's why I'm here, because nobody wants me, nobody loves me. So my self-worth was extremely low, and you're just going through the motions. And I recall one day this baby arrived to the house. Her name was Marama, and she was about 6 months old. And I remember Colleen, who was a foster mum, coming up to me and saying, "Donna, this is your baby." And I would have been 11. And I had no concept of how babies were made or born or anything, no idea. And I just believed it. I thought, oh, well, she must be my baby, And she said, you need to look after this baby. You need to feed it. You need to change its nappies. You need to bath it, just like she's yours. So that's what I did. I still was attending school, and as soon as I left for school, I'd be thinking about Marama all day at school, and then I'd come home and I'd be doing everything that I needed to do, bathing her and feeding her and changing her nappies, putting her to bed, waking up and looking after her if she woke. And I really, really grew quite a attachment to Marama, and bonded with her quite a bit, and I think I probably looked after her for about 4 to 6 months. And again, I don't have a lot of concept over time, but she obviously it was enough time that she had a big impact on my life. And then one day I came home from school and Colleen, the foster mum, just said, I said, "Where's Marama?" She was gone. And Colleen said, "Yeah, she's gone." And I said, "What do you mean she's gone?" And she said, "She's gone. She's gone back to her family and you won't see her again." And that was devastating to me. Absolutely. I couldn't understand it, and I was just totally devastated and incredibly, again, going through another lot of trauma, separation anxiety, and during this time I lost my grandmother. She died when I was 11, and she was a lovely, soft, she was my mum's mum, and a lovely, soft lady. And I recall when we were young, she'd bring big bags of lollies to us, and she was a bit of a hypochondriac. She always talked about her health and how sick she was, but she was always a cuddly lady. And I just remember lots of fond memories of her laughing and looking after us when we were young. And so losing her while in this house without any support and any love or nurturing was really hard. And I never got to go to her funeral. She passed away in Wellington and we were in Auckland. So I just had to go through that grieving again in silence, really.
So you get out of these last ones and you get into a family with everyone together again?
So the last memory I have of this last foster home was a parcel arrived one day to the home. And I turned to the foster mother, Colleen, and I said, "Oh, what's in the parcel?" Just a curious, 12-year-old. And she turned to me and she said, "How dare you ask what's in the parcel? You have no right to ask what's in the parcel. You are a nosy little bitch." Then she proceeded to hang on the wall in the dining room pages and pages of lined paper and said to me, "Now you're going to reach up onto the wall and write on this paper 1,000 times, 'I am a nosy little bitch.'" And those sheets were kept up on the wall for 4 weeks while we had our breakfast, lunch and dinner, the whole foster home family. And so I got ridiculed from her children and it was awful.
Just mental torment.
Crazy stuff.
So how'd you get out of there?
One day, one of the social welfare workers came to the house and said, "Donna, you have 2 choices now. You can stay in foster care," and basically how I took that is accept whatever abuse is dished out to you until you're 18 years old and free to leave, or you can return to your father, who's been released from prison.
How long did he do?
3.5 years.
So he got charged with murder and he did 3.5 years?
He got charged with manslaughter. So 3.5 years, and so this was quite a bit of time after because of the court hearings and all that kind of thing in between. But yes, so the most difficult thing about this decision, though, was we had to return back to the house where he murdered my mum.
All of you?
So it wasn't a matter of starting afresh with him in a new environment. We had to go back to the memories and the trauma and the torment. Which I can't even fathom, to be honest, that, a child welfare service would allow that kind of abuse of children. It's just, beyond me.
So did you make the choice or did you talk to your siblings first?
My my twin brother and I, we decided, I think, together that was the best thing, because we were all going to be reunited, and it was something stable, something that we knew that we're not going to be moving again and again and again. And
better the devil you know, sort of
yes, yeah. So it was scary. It was scary. I recall going back to the house, and it was quite surreal, to be honest, quite surreal. Just.
Can you remember your first day?
I recall walking in, and the home looked different because it had been rented out for some time through the public trust system, and so a lot of our furniture wasn't there, and it looked a little barren and not our familiar things that we had or that I recall. It was, empty without Mum's love in there, and the memory of what had happened, and it was really quite unusual. The neighbours were still the same neighbours, and so I'm coming back to this environment as a 12-year-old and entering intermediate, which is what, year 7 or 8, year 8, something like that, and trying to fit into this environment that used to be home to me, and seeing familiar faces, but not feeling like I know them, or it was, and that I couldn't talk about it, and it was all just this secret. It was like something that I just kept to myself, and almost, like, taboo, a taboo subject. Yeah.
And was that something you guys discussed, or it just happened?
Just happened naturally. And I'm not sure whether maybe it was because I was preteen and embarrassed and concerned, wondering what my peers may think of me. But I recall having recurring nightmares while I was in the house. And these, without a doubt, in some way were related to what I'd seen and what I'd experienced. And this, it's really weird, but I had this embossed wallpaper in my bedroom, and it was nothing, out of the norm or anything kind of radical. But I recall this wallpaper, like people, like they were thousands and thousands of people just kind of coming in and suffocating me. And I had this recurring nightmare over and over and over again, and it was like, actually, I became delirious. Like, I would wake and I would be sweating and in a real delirious state. Like, it was, so that's trauma, yeah. So during these years in the home, returning was incredibly unpredictable. My father had mental health issues. He was schizophrenic, I am certain. He was an alcoholic. He slept with a knife next to his bed every night, which was terrifying because it just reminded you every day of what he was capable of, because you'd seen what he was capable of, and to have this knife was just a constant reminder of, being in a state of fear. And so, and because he was so often drunk, we would return home from school and we wouldn't know what kind of mood he was in from one day to the next. And sometimes he would be incredibly charismatic and, just so friendly to my friends that would come, and other times he would be quite mad. And, I just couldn't work him out. I couldn't, understand where he was coming from. But the interesting thing was he was incredibly intelligent. He spoke 3 languages fluently and almost bordering on genius, his intelligence. But very strange. Never spoke about the murder, never spoke about any of it, almost like it never happened. And that was just so weird to live in that kind of environment where you couldn't talk about it and you were walking on eggshells all the time, wondering what he was capable of, if we were going to survive this or not. And there were many times where he was aggressive to my brothers and would not, bash them around and get really abusive with them.
So talk of retribution from the older boys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We had a plan at one stage, or they did, yeah, my brothers, and they were, at times they were wanting to finish him.
So how long does that last at that home?
Oh, we were there until my father, or Bob, passed away at 17. So
okay, yep.
So we were there for the entire 5 years.
Did you have any plans to get out of there earlier? Because I know that sort of around that time people leave home, earlier.
Yeah, well, I guess my twin brother and I, still being at school, we're in school certificate year. So back then it was year 5, fifth form, and so too early for us to leave. And my brothers would never have left us there on our own. So it wasn't really an option. So
you had some form of protection.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and they were very protective, especially my brother Stefan. He was the oldest, and yeah, so yeah, just odd. My father Bob was pro-Nazi, so he believed in the Aryan race and extremely racially discriminating. And I had a number of Maori and Pacific Island friends, and he would say all sorts of really weird things to me, which really clearly kind of displayed his mental health condition. Things like he would get the newspaper out in the morning and he'd read it, and there might have been an attack on somebody from a Maori or Pacific Islander, or there might have been a rape, and he would have said things like, "Look, Donna, one of your friends has raped somebody this morning on the newspaper." And that was his mental way of getting back at me, and for having these friendships was to, so really odd sort of behaviour. I remember coming home quite often, like I had this free range. I seemed to have no kind of curfew. So there was no real boundaries, but I was terrified when I would come home. So at 16, 17, I'd just be able to go and walk the streets all night and spend time with my friends and my brothers. And I'd come home, and then as soon as I entered the house, I was terrified. Like I would creep up the spiral staircase, and I knew which ones creaked, and I would avoid them. And as soon as I got to the top of the spiral staircase, Bob would cough every time, just to let me know that he knew I was there and I was coming in. And so it was really quite a unstable time. And we did it. We kind of experimented a lot with drugs at that time, especially marijuana. And I'm not proud of that, but it was a way to numb the pain and get through that time.
So did you have any conversations or challenge him at all during the time, when he was passing away, when he was sick?
No, he was not a man that you wanted to confront with that kind of thing, because he was so unpredictable. I really didn't know which way that would go. Even
when he was frail on his deathbed?
Well, on his deathbed, it came very suddenly. He was having a second major bypass operation, and he died on the operating theatre. So we really didn't know kind of how frail at that stage he was. He was still quite capable prior to that. So yeah, not the sort of person you'd want to sit and have one of those conversations with. It must have been, I think I was very fearful of him most of the time.
that is a lot of trauma and anguish and adversity in a short lifespan. How'd you get through it at that age?
Well, we went flatting. All of us sort of separated and kind of did our own thing for a while, and I realised, because of my schooling being so disruptive and so unstable, I had to drop out of school to actually survive and support myself financially. I took a few jobs that I wasn't, were taking me nowhere really. And I think quite quickly I realised, well, hey, I've either got to do something to turn this around and get some qualifications behind me, because I'm on my own now and I've got to support myself financially. I've got to, so it was kind of an awakening, and I decided that I needed to go back and pass some of my school certificate subjects in order to go and get into an adult apprenticeship. I wanted to get into fashion and fashion and pattern designing, and I needed a school certificate subject to get into that as an adult apprentice. So I went and studied in the evenings, and I passed. And then from there, I applied for an adult apprenticeship, and I had very little self-esteem. I had very little belief in myself academically, because I was always struggling with schoolwork, because there was never any kind of consistency in my learning, being moved so often, and having no support at home to help me through that either. So I was just really failing all the time at school. And so when I went and studied in the evening, I had very low self-belief as to whether I was going to be able to actually do this. And so when I applied as an adult apprentice, it was for the largest shirt manufacturer in New Zealand, Summit Shirts. I had to go to trade college, and for 3 years I had to sit my trade certificate examinations. And I just had this determination. And I don't know whether this determination just came to me from all of this strength and overcoming adversity over and over again in my life, and the resilience that I developed. Just, built this internal determination within me to just push through and put every single ounce of effort I possibly could into it. And so for 3 years, I studied my ass off, like really. And at the end of the 3 years, I got the top trade certificate marks in New Zealand, and I won the Golden Shears Apprentice of the Year award. Now, this was amazing for me. It was such a profound turning point in my life, and I just couldn't believe it, that I was capable of this. Standing on the stage, accepting an award with the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand. It's just an incredible thing for me, and so empowering. And I think it was at this time that I realised I needed to invest in working through all the stuff that I'd been through and my childhood trauma. And so I did, and I went and I got some counselling at Lifeline initially, face-to-face counselling. And then I also had a psychologist. I went and saw a psychologist and got hypnotherapy. I did cognitive behavioural therapy. So there were lots of angles on this therapy that I wanted to really work through.
What brings that about, though? Do you know what I mean?
I think it was one night, actually. I was really feeling quite down and under pressure and alone, and I rang Lifeline.
Because you was feeling suicidal?
I felt really not suicidal. I've never had those thoughts, actually, ever. Thank goodness, because I understand how really, how confronting that can be. And no, I've never had those thoughts, but I have been in a very dark place. And I made that call to Lifeline, and they were incredibly supportive and helped me in that real moment of despair, and gave me so much hope, and actually suggested that I come in and get some face-to-face counselling because of my trauma. And there's just so much to my story and so much to my experience that she wasn't able to address on the phone, but saw that I was reaching out and saw that I was in this place where, you're ready to work on yourself, so take the step. And so that's what I did. I chose to make an appointment there and then on the phone to have that face-to-face. And so I did, and I worked through all this. And during the time I was with Lifeline getting all this counselling, I chose to actually do the Lifeline training because I saw so much value in what they were doing, and I really, I was getting so much out of it, and I wanted to give back because these people are volunteers and they helped me so much, and I just felt like I really wanted to use my experience to help others in some way. And so this was kind of quite a defining moment in my life of wanting to, then learn and get some tools and some experience and training. So I went and did the 6-month Lifeline telephone crisis counselling course, and life-changing, like really incredible course. And it's got an amazing reputation, actually, that course. And so I did suicide prevention training also, and I then volunteered for 2 years on the phones in Sydney as a crisis telephone counsellor. So that was really powerful. I had a few suicidal calls as well, and that was they were always confronting calls, and you require quite a bit of debriefing after those calls, and so the support services are there for you. But it was amazing feeling to give back, to be honest.
Can you take comfort in the fact that most of them have been through some sort of conflict? And
yes, yeah, and I saw myself there, only months beforehand, so I can so empathise with where they're at and the experiences they're going through, and they're just like everyone else. We're all experiencing our own challenges in our life, and so there's it's not unusual, and we all have mental health. It's just
whether it's good or not.
Yeah. During this time when I was really giving back, and I was working on myself, and I guess my mantra was just, I was in this growth period of my life where I was really wanting to invest in myself. This big bit of news came to me just out of the blue, and it knocked me for a total 6. And I was 22, and my auntie, I caught up with my auntie. I went down to Wellington to spend some time with my auntie. She was in her 80s, my mother's sister, very, very close to my auntie. And she shared some information with me that she had kept for all these years. And she shared with me that when my mother had travelled down to Wellington as a young woman having shock treatment for her mental health breakdown, my mum met my real dad, and they had an affair. And I couldn't believe this. It was just the most astounding news. It blew me away. It really blew me away, this news. And I just straight away, I was like, the first experience I had, the first emotion was relief, actually. Relief that Bob wasn't my father. And I guess a level of, weird as it sounds, responsibility or guilt, that it's not my bloodline, or that, my bloodline isn't responsible for my mum's death or something. I don't know, but it was like this real strong feeling inside me that, there was a sense of relief from this blood is not mine. My father's not, this Bob isn't my father. And so the next emotion was, wow, who's my dad? I want to know, who is he? And my auntie didn't know much about him. She remembered a couple of things. She remembered his name, but only vaguely. She remembered that he was living in Levin. And so the research started. And thankfully, my uncle was a member of the Genealogy Society, and this was his passion, was to find, everybody's family tree and all the bloodlines, and he'd done quite a bit of research on my mum's side of the family already. And so this was his little project I gave him and said, look, is there any way we can discover who my real father is? And I made a few phone calls, and I finally spoke to this woman, Desiree Fraser. She'd lived in Levin all her life, and she had married my dad 3 years after he had had the affair with my mum. So we were 3 years old, my twin brother and I. And she'd married my dad, and in love, totally in love, and unfortunately, it was less than 2 years they were married, and my father was a painter, a painting contractor, and he was working on the Porirua School in Levin, and he was painting the roof of the Porirua School, and he fell through the skylight and landed on his head and died instantly. I never got to meet him. It was, So, you could imagine that sort of roller coaster of a journey, finding out, that you've got a father, and wow, to then finding out he's deceased.
So tell me, how does this anti-bullying campaign stuff come about? Because were you missing your lifeline work, or, everything's travelling along, you're having kids?
Yeah. Well, my marriage broke up, and I went through another phase of my life where I was single mum, and it's always tough as a single mum to do your best, and I think also revisited some of the stuff from my childhood of, again, being in a separated sort of environment with my kids, and I think a lot of mums feel this guilt, especially when you're instigating maybe the separation. There's a little bit of guilt around that, whether you're doing the right thing for your family, your children. But I was really very clear that it was the right decision for me. And
can I ask, was there any domestic violence sort of stuff in that? Or
nothing at all. No. So their father he's a good man. He's a good dad to them, and they love him. And so no, there's nothing like that at all. And yeah, so during this time, Hamish was actually being bullied at one of the schools he was at, and that was quite painful for a mum to see, because as a child I was bullied terribly in these 13 schools I attended. In fact, I remember when as I spoke before about returning back to the home when my mother was murdered, I had teenagers following me home regularly, saying that I'm living in a haunted house and that kind of thing, and that was just a mild case of the bullying that went on. Thankfully, when I closed the door, that was the end of it, not like today where we've got cyberbullying, which is, a whole nother level. So my son was bullied, and, I had to pull him out of school. And
just define what bullying is for you, or was for him.
Well, actually, I must say, it was really more physical violence in this case. He was getting pushed up against a fence quite regularly. There were times when it was bullying, where it was name calling, but it escalated really more to physical violence. So we need to understand that there's a real difference here when we're talking about bullying and and violence, physical violence.
Well, why don't you put some parameters around that?
Okay. So many people do get this, mixed up, and so often you hear in the media that, my kid's been bashed or he's been bullied, and, they're defining that with some sort of physical violence. It might be punching, it might be, hitting, it might be, hair pulling or pushed on the ground or kicked. That is not bullying.
That's sort of what it is to me, in my definition.
Yeah, okay. So that's physical violence, and that's reportable. So that can be reported to the authorities. It can be reported to, of course, first of all, your principal, your school principal. But, this is serious. It's a serious issue, and it needs to be taken very seriously. We're talking about an imbalance of power from one person to another on a regular basis, over and over and over again. And this can be covert, overt, it can be online, it can be excluding people from circles of friends, it can be spreading rumours, it can be, spreading lies about somebody. So, lots of different levels of bullying, but it's repetitive. That is the key point.
Forgive my ignorance, what's overt and the other one you said not covert?
So one is hidden, okay, and one is actually, in the face. So it's face to face. Yeah. So I got into this whole anti-bullying thing because of obviously this experience I had with my son. But moving forward another probably 8-10 years, I met my husband now, and he is a professional comedian, Michael Bennett. A lot of people probably know him. He was Mad Mike, the warm-up crowd guy, and the stuntman for the Police Academy stunt show at Movie World for 16 years. So he's got quite a famous reputation for that role. Together, we actually met on RSVP, which is a pretty cool thing. And
how was that?
There's an interesting story about this, actually, because we both believe in the vision boards, and he created this vision board, and one of the things he had on his vision board was he wanted to meet the perfect woman. And when we started communicating, he was on cruise ships booked on cruise ships for a number of months because that's where he often works as a comedian. And so we were communicating online and getting to know each other. And about 3 or 4 weeks in, he asked me, I don't even know your last name. What's your last name? And I said, it's Perfect, Donna-Leigh Perfect. And he just went, get out of town. Oh, my God, can't believe it. I have to tell you the story about how I put this on
Perfect woman.
Yeah, so it came to life. Like
that's your actual
specific.
name, right?
Yeah, it's my actual name. It's my maiden name, my born name. Yeah. So a little bit unusual, isn't it?
It's a lot to live up to.
It is a lot to live up to, and certainly another reason I was bullied as a child. Yeah. So Michael and I, we got together and wow, from day one, really, it was just an adventurous ride, and we just had so much in common, and it is a match made in heaven, I have to say, because we just align in so many ways, and he's so good with the kids. The kids love him. He's a kid. He's one of my children, really. He's the biggest kid, and he'd admit that. He'd be the first to admit that.
What ages is that messages?
This message is for the primary school age children, so years prep to 6. We do this live stage show. And it's really amazing. I mean, it's just highly energetic, interactive. We've got amazing balloon artistry, which is a storyboard around the piece. I share a little bit about my story on stage, and it really inspires kids to believe they can overcome challenges in their life, because there I am. I'm proof of it.
Your lived experience.
Yeah. So it's a really fun, interactive show with a message.
Kids aren't my usual audience. So what advice can you give to parents like myself? Mine's a little older now, but, of younger ones going through that age.
Yeah. Look, I think, first of all, we have so much power and control over this situation, far more than we realise. And it's a matter of tapping into that power, that internal power. And like I say, the armour. So it's about not letting other people's opinion of you matter, because by doing that, what we're saying to ourselves is your opinion of me means more than my opinion of me. And that is not cool, because we all need to love ourselves. We all need to have self-compassion and be kind to ourselves. So number one, is really to build that armour and not worry about what people say or think about you. And with cyberbullying, this is the key thing, is we are taking the word and putting so much power to the word, and yet we can actually turn that word around. And I shared earlier with you the story about the parcel coming to the foster home. And when I was writing on the wall, I am a nosy little bitch, the two most powerful words in that sentence is I am. And so I chose to turn that sentence around and say, I am amazing. I am determined. I am strong. And so you can too change the words around and not let them affect you.
When did you decide to do that?
That's been a very recent thing. Just, I've worked through that myself. And so this is the wisdom I want to pass on to people now, because I have gone down this journey, and that's the gift now I'm giving back in my show, in the Dream Guard show that we're doing, and the Perfect Peace program, which is reinforcing all the messages we share on stage and classroom activities. So these are modules that teachers facilitate, and the mindfulness, there's gratitude, there's giving back to community, resilience, so really powerful.
Have you got any success stories around them?
Yes. In fact, just this week on Monday, we went to a huge school on the Gold Coast, 750 students we presented a social media workshop to, and we talked about, one aspect of this presentation was about inappropriate selfies that kids are taking on their phones.
And what age is this group then?
These are years 7 to 10. So teenagers mostly, and preteens, and talking about how these images they believe they are taking and sharing with one person who they trust. Once they share that image is completely public. So it would be like standing on the freeway half naked. And who's going to do that? Are you going to do that? No, of course, no one's going to do that, right? So by sharing that selfie, that is what you are doing. And not only that, but you are also creating a digital footprint that is there forever. And future employers are looking at this digital footprint, and it has a major impact on your life in the future when you're looking to get work. So they're no longer really looking at your paper CV. They're looking at your Facebook, your Instagram, your Snapchat for your authentic character. So, keep it sacred. And so this is the message we shared with these kids on Monday. One of the girls walked out of school that day, at the end of the day, went home and sat down with her mum, a year 10 student, and shared with her mum how she'd been taking inappropriate selfies on her phone and sharing it. And she wanted to let her mum know that how sorry she was doing this. And the school, the parents rang the school, shared it with one of the deans and said, wow, this is a breakthrough, such a breakthrough. So that's just one way we're making a difference.
Donna, thanks for coming in today. Really appreciate your time and the inspiration you're giving young kids and some parents. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I want to leave with a note of gratitude. And the gratitude is to my mum for this incredible experience, this childhood trauma that I've gone through now, that is a gift that I can give back and empower others to believe they can overcome adversity and live their dreams. So that's my gift.
Cool. Just on your mum, I didn't really touch on what you remember about her, what sort of person she was. You said she went away for some shock treatment, but I think, what sort of memories do you have of her?
Yeah, I remember little quirky things about my mum. I think she had a really good sense of humour, so we used to laugh quite a bit. And her name was Alison, and she used to call herself Alligator, quite often, and that was a funny, quirky thing we had. She was a nurse, and so a very caring, compassionate person. I remember her being kind and loving and caring and very fashionable too. And that's about all I remember, to be honest. There's not a lot of clear memories. But yeah, I loved her. I loved her a lot.
Cool. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
See you around.
See ya.
Thanks for listening. That's 2 back-to-back amazingly courageous women I've spoken to for the last 2 episodes. If you're a long-time listener, thank you for checking in with me via social media, text and in person. The last few months have been extremely difficult to have any consistency with the show, and I apologise for the delay in episode frequency. I know there have been calls for more episodes, but some of my guest stories have been extremely personal, challenging and emotional. I've recorded another 4 or so episodes and they'll be released as soon as I can. Anyway, again, thanks for your support. You, the listener, I really appreciate you. Stay humble, stay kind, and stay smiling. Odds out.